I'll tell you, you scoot next to each other with her, man. Going shoulder to shoulder with her, man. I'll tell you what.
We have John Gruden on the podcast today, apparently.
Hey, I've had a couple drinks today. I always say a couple drinks in, John Gruden comes out.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Team Morale Podcast, where we do our three favorite things: talk a little bit of booze, a little bit of beer, and a whole lot of basketball. Ian, the tall guy, back with you again, and we have a special guest on the podcast tonight. Mitch, introduce us to our special guest.
We have B. Hattie. Old Brandon is joining us on the podcast. What's up, Brandon?
Hey, been a while. It's good to be back.
It has been a minute. I think we were doing the Clippers deep dive last time you were here.
We did, and they're starting to play better. I only come out when they start to play better. It's maybe fair weather me, but it is what it is.
Clippers on the up and up. Brandon back on the pod. What more could we want?
Oh, nothing.
Must be a bleak week.
But yes, thank you for joining us again, Brandon. Love having you here.
Anytime.
Well, speaking of bleak, we have a kind of a bleak outlook on the podcast today. Today we were talking injuries.
Aww.
A little bit of a sad boy season podcast, but with all the injuries going on in the NBA today, it's worth noting, worth talking about, definitely something that we should dive into.
Yeah, so there's one thing that has a huge impact on the outcomes of our beloved sports, and it is injuries. You can't control them. Sometimes they're total freak accidents. Sometimes you can see them coming, and it's just a part of the game. It's part of the nature of the game in any and all of the sports that we love to watch. And so we kind of wanted to break down what is going on with injuries throughout the course of the season, what's going on right now, and how's it going to be the impact going forward, especially after that bad Jamal Murray injury last night.
Yeah, unfortunately for Nuggets fans and for NBA fans altogether, Jamal Murray tearing his ACL, one of 5 players that have torn their ACL so far this year, which is higher than normal. Just a kind of a tough year so far in terms of injuries. If you're a Lakers fan, you definitely know LeBron, AD has been out, Embiid's missed games. There's just a lot of superstars this year that seem to be out of playing time.
It's really odd, and sometimes I feel this might be kind of my Laker hate, but
hate away, brother, hate away.
I only need a few seconds, but it feels like more superstars than normal are hurt. But a little bit of me is like, oh, it's because LeBron's out. We always know LeBron's so durable. It's like, oh, now that he's out, it's like, you know what, this guy's hurt, and this guy's hurt. It just, for whatever reason, it feels like way more people are injured when LeBron is out, even if that's not the case.
No, that totally makes sense. But before we get into all of the injury talk, I want to talk about the whiskey that we are drinking tonight.
Shameless plug.
Before we do.
Mitch is getting a t-shirt that says, "But before we do." And it's literally Mitch going to be holding up his finger and maybe a glass in the other hand. But before we do.
Just take my money, will you?
Yeah. So what we have here tonight is the Elijah Craig Small Batch Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. And this is straight off their website. I'm just going to read off a little bit of history for you guys. So, Reverend Elijah Craig was a Baptist preacher, an educator, and an entrepreneur who built the first paper and wool mills in Georgetown, Kentucky. But for all his talents, it was his gift as a distiller and an innovator that made him truly great. In 1789, Elijah Craig became the first distiller to age his whiskey in new charred oak barrels. Some claim that was an accidental fire that charred his barrels and changed the whiskey inside. Others say he stored it in his whiskey in former sugar barrels and was impressed with how the charring improved the flavor. However it happened, Elijah Craig knew he had discovered something great. He continued to refine the barrel charring process, imparting smooth, rich flavor to the spirit that would become known as bourbon. 250 years later, he is still known as the father of bourbon.
So what I got from that is we're drinking holy whiskey. A Baptist pastor makes whiskey on accident by accidentally burning down something, and we get to drink it?
Yes.
Act of God.
Through Elijah Craig, God gave us bourbon. The father of bourbon. Thank you, Elijah Craig.
Thanks, Elijah.
Appreciate it.
But yeah, so it's obviously very old. It was originally made in 1789. And I don't think that they've messed with the recipe a whole lot. This is kind of their go-to, this small batch that we're drinking tonight. And so we'll sip on it and we'll see what we have to say about it.
Yeah, let us get a couple of glasses deep and we'll definitely open up on the flavor a little bit. But yeah, God's intervention here on the Team Morale podcast, giving us some holy whiskey here from the Baptists.
Thanks, Baptist. Appreciate it. But let's get into a little bit of some injury talk and kind of what's been going on around the league.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of not necessarily break it down team by team, but kind of rifle through some teams, talk about some injuries, and kind of just, if a team doesn't have a lot of injuries, we're going to kind of glance by it. But if the team has had a major injury, then we're going to kind of talk through it a little bit. And we're going to start with the Western Conference. And we're going to work our top from the top all the way down. So in the Western Conference, health means that you're going to be good because it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. It is just shark-infested waters. Everyone in the West is good, and anytime you lose a game, you lose something in the standings, right? Well, it goes by saying that the top two teams in the West have been generally healthy in the Utah Jazz and the Phoenix Suns. Not anyone really being gruesomely injured, not anyone missing an extended period of time, just nothing of note there on the injury front.
Yeah, exactly. So the top two teams, like you were saying, the Jazz and the Suns, both been pretty healthy this year. And I think that attributes a lot to the success and the sustained success that they've been able to have all season. It is vital that you keep your best players healthy, especially when you're in such a crazy conference like the Western Conference this year.
What a concept. Keep your best players healthy. Well, I mean, for Utah, I mean, Gobert got his he got it out of the way last year. You know, he shut down the whole league. So he's getting it out of the way from last year. So he's just making up for it. But traditionally, he hasn't really had some health success. He's had a lot of injuries over his career.
Yeah, Gobert is that. I mean, when you're just
that big,
when you're just a gigantic human like he is, you're gonna have issues like that. I mean, that's just a given. But overall, I mean, Donovan Mitchell to me seems like a guy that's built pretty well. He doesn't seem like is going to have a lot of injury problems. Conley over the course of his career has always been like, you know, remarkably healthy.
He's durable.
Yeah, very durable. They got a really durable team.
Yeah, absolutely. Both the Suns and the Jazz have had a lot of success due to the fact that they have had their players available when they needed them. Mm-hmm. Team coming in third, the Clippers, has generally had a lot of health. They've had Patrick Beverley missing some games. Kawhi and Paul George have been missing games here and there. Brandon, I'm sure you can attest to that as a Clippers fan.
Yeah. What's been good with them is that it's never really overlapped. Sometimes when these stars, if it overlaps, kind of like what the Lakers are dealing with right now, like they've took a huge hit losing their top players. It was nice. I don't want to call it nice. Injuries always suck. Just that they didn't happen at the same time. That, even without Kawhi, we're still a really solid team. Even without Paul George, we're still a really solid team. We're probably not a championship caliber team without both of them. But we've been really fortunate that they haven't been crazy serious. I think Paul George missed he was out for maybe a month or so. I think it was an ankle injury, I want to say. And then Kawhi always kind of had the load management thing. But it's been nice that it hasn't overlapped those injuries. But
I was gonna say, like, I might be the conspiracy theorist coming out in me, but it's fishy that you guys never have your two stars overlapping in injuries.
Well, talk to me last year when we didn't have the chemistry. It really came back to bite us. So
It's very true. That can affect the chemistry, and load management is a part of the injury discussion because these guys in this era are now deciding like it's worth it for me to miss a game here and there and to rest my body, be ready for when playoffs come. And the Clippers are the epitome of the load management system. But there have been other injuries, and you guys have been pretty lucky this year.
Yeah, that gets such a bad rap. It's like we're the kings of load management. It's like, well, I mean, in some way it kind of works. I mean, you want your players healthy.
Yeah.
So
you want to get past the second round.
Other than us, hey, that's just the Clippers clipping. That has nothing to do with injuries. That's I could have told you that one.
Well, speaking of the Clippers clipping, the team that beat them in the playoffs last year suffered a very heavy blow in the Denver Nuggets having Jamal Murray tear his ACL last night. The reason we're doing this injury pod is to talk injuries overall, but what sparked it was Jamal Murray suffering such a brutal injury last night.
Yeah, I mean, in a year where injuries are definitely controlling a lot of the narratives and a lot of the seeding right now, and a lot of what the final positions for like MVP and stuff might turn out to, this is a huge blow. This is like, you hate seeing a guy tear his ACL, and you hate seeing it be as good of a player as Jamal Murray is. It's going to be really interesting to see how the Nuggets bounce back from this. What do the Nuggets look like going forward? My assumption is that they probably start Monte Morris, and it might be a hot take. I still think that they're going to be really good. I don't know if this impacts like how they play for the rest of the season. I think if anything, it impacts how well they do in the playoffs. But you just hate to see good young players go down in that fashion.
I think the timing is really unfortunate too, because this is going to push well into next season as well. I mean, an ACL, right, is I guess generally with football, I would assume all sports really, it's a good 9-10 months before you can even come back, and that's well into next season. I mean, that's as we're getting close to. I mean, that's what 2/3 of next season.
Yeah, it's gonna be a brutal blow. I mean, Jamal Murray has always shown that he's a hard worker. He kind of grinds. He's not afraid to put his nose down. So if he attacks his rehabilitation, his rehab, going to physical therapy, just kind of grinding on it, he can come back sooner. But in terms of being able to be ready to play in the NBA, yeah, you're looking at least 8, 9, 10 months from now.
Yeah, and so the Nuggets right now are obviously the focal point of this conversation that we wanted to have. And it's just it sucks, and it's right as they were really clicking. They just got Aaron Gordon. They're ready to make this push to like make it to the next level. Like last year, make it to the conference finals. Now they're trying to push a team like the Lakers, who is the next team that we're going to talk about, who have had their fair share of injuries as well.
Yeah, I mean, when you're missing guys like Anthony Davis and LeBron James due to injury, that's brutal. I mean, you combine their stats, that's ridiculous numbers putting up, carrying teams. I mean, you look at the supporting cast around them, it's not bad, but take those two off, that's the worst team in the West by far.
Well, that's so interesting to me because in the offseason, all the discussion that we've had and how all the national media guys had was, wow, look how good the Lakers supporting cast is compared to what it was last year. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, LeBron and AD are out. It's like they are dying right now. They can't hold water right now. Like they are struggling. They've already pretty much replaced Marc Gasol. They're relying on Andre Drummond and Schroeder to carry them through a loaded Western Conference.
And speaking of Schroeder, he's been out for a while too. Mm-hmm. He's missed some time. And again, adding a guy like Drummond is an interesting guy to the mix. But like injuries like that just make a super huge impact on what is going to happen with this team.
Yeah, luckily they had enough of a not a lead. They were high enough in the end. They'd won a bunch of games to where, despite them kind of slipping, despite these injuries, that they're still hanging on to and possibly still fighting for home court with this. So they're hanging on, and but it'll be such a breath of fresh air when they come back. And even too, like a fresh AD and a fresh LeBron for the playoffs is a little worrisome.
Yeah, you can make them the 10 seed and have to play in a play-in game. If you have a fresh AD and a fresh LeBron, I'm picking them to win the whole thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, so LeBron and AD are the most important duo to their team than anyone in the league because with them healthy, they're probably the title favorites right there next to the Brooklyn Nets. And without them, they're not even close to being a playoff team because you see how far they were easily top number 1 seed, easily coasting to it. Both those guys go down and they go tumbling down, and now it's looking like they might have to end up playing in a play-in game if teams like the Mavericks, the Blazers, and the Grizzlies continue to play as well as they have been.
Yeah, and speaking of the Blazers, that's the next team we're going to talk about here going down the Western Conference standings as of today. They have also dealt with their fair share of injuries. I mean, Nurkic has been out, CJ has been out. Just a lot of players have been hurt, and a team that definitely needs their guys to be playing well because in terms of talent, they have a lot, but they need to put it together in order to rise up the standings.
Yeah, nobody knows the life of having injured stars like the Trailblazers do, especially injured big men. We always have injured big men, and it just sucks. It's just one of those things that you know is going to happen, and you just live with everything from Sam Bowie having horrible knees to Greg Oden going down and only playing 82 full games as a Blazer, and now Nurkic snapping his leg, and all year this year just having nagging injuries that is keeping him out and stuff. And it's one of those things that's tough. I mean, it's nice to have a guy like Dame where he can just backpack you, but still those supporting cast guys are really important. I think right now you're starting to see with the Blazers, like Dame has been playing horrible over the last week or two. I think he's just gassed from how hard he's had to work all year, because when your other top guys, even if it's not your number one guy, but if your 2, 3, 4, 5 best players are out for significant periods of time, it makes a huge impact on your players going forward throughout the rest of this grind that is the NBA season.
Yeah, and even a gassed Dame is still an incredible NBA player that has carried the team really the last year or 2 or 10.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it feels like people are always hurt, and then there's Dame who's not hurt and just backpacking the team, which is fun to watch, but I'd rather we just be healthy and good the whole time.
What's in the water up there, man? What's in the water?
The water's delicious up there, but apparently it causes your leg to snap in half.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's brutal. I mean, Blazer fans know firsthand how difficult an NBA season is, because there just always seems to be somebody important to this team that goes down, and then they're always having to play with a hand tied behind their back, and it's just brutal up there in Portland sometimes.
It's tough being a Blazer fan, because you know that the injuries are going to happen. It's been amazing having a star like Dame be as durable as he has been, but then you still have all the other guys that go down. So the Blazers of all teams know what it's like to be missing players. But the next team we're going to talk about is the Dallas Mavericks, who haven't been unhealthy, but got hit hard early on with the COVID stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the Mavericks, generally, if your name is not Kristaps Porzingis, you can play, and it means that you can play on back-to-backs, because boy, would I like Kristaps Porzingis' job, because if you work a day, it means you get a day off. And that sounds fantastic. That being said, the Mavericks were absolutely brutalized by COVID at the beginning of the year. They lost, I think, 6 or 7 rotation players to COVID tracing and COVID being positive for COVID and a bunch of stuff. So it was brutal for them at the beginning of the year. They have said bounce back. Overall, they've been relatively healthy. They've missed, players here and there, but for the most part, everyone's been on the roster. So all in all, not much to talk about here on the Dallas Mavericks front in terms of injuries.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest injury news that you guys always have is just going to come down to KP. Porzingis, it sucks that he can't play more than 2 games at a time. I don't know if that's a him decision or if that's a management decision, but he's the kind of load management where you actually got to watch after him. You got to see what's going on with him. You always have to be monitoring him, which kind of sucks. But we're going to move on to the next team down the list, which is the Memphis Grizzlies, that also have a big man that's been having a lot of injury troubles this year.
Yeah. Won by Triple J, Jaren Jackson Jr., a very important person for the Grizzlies, their best shooter by far from deep, their best defender on the team, a very well-rounded defender, can guard the perimeter for a big man, can block shots, is a very versatile guy. Some say Draymond-esque in the defensive realm, plus a little bit more post defense, and just all in all a great player.
Yeah, he's a great player. That's interesting with the Draymond thing, because he's like 1.5 Draymonds. He's massive. So it just to have that skill set as such a big man too. I think he's the future of big men. Yeah,
I think it's funny that we were just talking KP, because I relate Jaren Jackson's game very much to Kristaps Porzingis' game. He's a 7-footer that would rather shoot threes and would rather kind of handle the ball, dribble it into the lane, as opposed to have your back to the basket and do turnarounds or do hook shots or anything like that. He can hit it from deep, and he loves that kind of game, which I don't know at this point if that's good or bad for a big guy to be playing out in the perimeter that much, because we're seeing with KP it's tough, and now Jaren has pretty much been out all year. He has a knee injury, and he actually is pretty much cleared to play at this point. If pretty much those playoffs, he'd be playing basketball. But they said the longer that you wait, the stronger your knee is going to get. So the Grizzlies have been extra cautious with him. And especially since Ja Morant has been backpacking this team to still be the 8 seed in this crazy hard West right now, they're going to let Jaren take his time, and they're going to let him get back to being the guy that they want him to be, because him plus Ja can compete with just about anyone in the West, I think, at least.
What a tough decision. If you're the Grizzlies, it's like, what do we do? Right now we're the 8th seed with how many games left? I mean, maybe
about 20.
A dozen, 15, 20. Just that what do? You're the 8 seed. You want to hang on. You want to make the playoffs. You don't want to deal with this play-in stuff that, or is the 8 in the play-in? Is the
8, 7 through 10 are the play-in.
Okay,
so
they'll still be in the play-in.
They're in the heart of the play-in, but also like
do you bring back one of your best players and risk them going down, or that's a very fine line for them. It's curious to see what they're doing. I think they're playing it safe, which is ultimately I think the best decision for them.
They're playing the long game because again, Triple J is very young, and they want to make sure that when they bring him back, he's healthy because they're going to invest in him. He's going to be part of their long-term future beyond this year. But also, it's a big point to be made that like. This year, they're making a push. They're as hot as any team can be right now. And if introduce a guy like that to a team like this, it could be dangerous.
Yeah, I think that they're definitely playing that long game because if you're a Grizzlies fan, you don't think that you're competing for anything serious right now, but you think that you have the core to compete for a championship with Jaren and with Ja. And so you want these guys to be healthy and clicking for years going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to the next team, we have the San Antonio Spurs, who generally, for the most part, have been relatively healthy. They've lost DeJounte Murray for a couple of games here and there, not really anything extended, but overall have been relatively healthy.
Yeah, so Murray has been out recently, and you can kind of trace back to where the Spurs started this slump because going into the All-Star game, they were like the 6 seed, 7 seed, something like that, and then they lost DeJounte shortly after that, and ever since they've really been declining. I think DeJounte is a huge piece of that team. I've declared my love for DeJounte Murray. I think that he is going to be amazing. Potential DPOY. You don't see a lot of guard DPOYs out there, but I think that he could compete and be one of those guys. Massive explosiveness. Like, he is a very, very good basketball player, and I think you can directly see how it's impacting the Spurs, where they went from being a very like solid playoff team in the West, and now all of a sudden they're fighting to be in that the play-in game.
DeJounte, an underrated guy in 2K. I will point out, I've had him in our franchise mode of leagues we've tried to put together, and very underrated and big fan. Big fan. Yeah, he's a great player. He brings a big skill set to that team.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a lot to kind of add on that. The Spurs relatively healthy outside of him. I mean, they've had guys miss games here and there, but not necessarily of note. The Warriors have had arguably the biggest injury hit so far this entire NBA season, with Klay Thompson not even suiting up for a game.
Part of me is really realizing how important Klay is to everything that the Warriors do. Because last year, obviously, it was just Steph, no Draymond, no Klay, bunch of scrubs. They were trying to lose last year. This year, they came in with a whole new bolstered roster. Like, we brought in Andrew Wiggins, Brandon Oubre, you got Wiseman, you got Kent Bazemore, you got like a decent bench at least, and they're still fighting for the 10 seed. Like, I think that Klay is a huge part of that team, and the fact that he's missed 2 straight seasons just sucks, man. Like, I miss watching the guy.
Is there still talk of him possibly hanging it up due to the injuries?
Has
that died down?
As of now, I'm not entirely sure.
Because when he first got injured, I feel like there was talk of that.
There was definitely talk of it, but I don't think so far. I don't think so. He's still with the team. He still goes to all the home games. I'm not sure he travels, but it is interesting to see with Steph putting up like crazy numbers that they're still just fighting for the 10 seed. That just shows how important guys like Klay is to this team, because Draymond's still doing what Draymond does. They arguably have a better roster than they had before they got KD when they broke the wins record. If Klay was healthy, this roster would rival that same team. Yet you take one guy off, and this team is fighting for the 10 seed in the East, fighting to be 500.
I will say that the bench for that team was probably better, because you had David West, you had Sean Livingston, and those guys like really made that bench as good as they were. But yes, as far as like an overall roster, the talent is arguable outside of the Steph, Klay, Draymond, is very arguably better than that roster was too. So it's really interesting. And so the Warriors have been impacted by injury just as much as anybody has in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I would agree. Warriors definitely, in my opinion, lose so far in terms of just injury hits so far this year. But that exhausts the 10, so basically the, quote, playoff teams. We're kind of going to rifle through these last few teams. Pelicans, generally healthy. Not a lot to really bring up there. I mean, they've lost guys here and there, but again, nothing substantial. The Kings have been struggling without Bagley. They've lost a couple of other guys. I mean, I think Fox has been relatively healthy, but Hield's been kind of in and out of the lineup for the most part. But Bagley has been their biggest injury Achilles so far. The Thunder have been struggling without Shea for a while, but I honestly, if you think about it, they also could be a tanking procedure with him, just holding him out. He's young, save the tread on his tires. Let's, wait for him to be worth playing because we're trying to lose anyways. The Rockets, Christian, they were doing actually pretty well. Even post-Harden trade, they were doing pretty well. And then Christian Wood got hurt. And then kind of everything went to shit. So that's kind of worth of note. But again, they're terrible now. He's been back. And lastly, the Timberwolves have been struggling without D'Lo and Cat in and out of the lineup all season.
Even as you go down that list of the Western Conference teams, we said Utah and Phoenix. Every other team, one of their top 2-3 players we mentioned on each of those teams. Every single one. 12 of the 15. Yeah. Or 13 of the 15. You could name of the people we've gone down. I mean, that's one of their top, if not 2 or 3 players.
Yeah, and I think that determines a lot of what's going to go on in the NBA season is what kind of injuries, because I'm willing to bet that if the Warriors had Klay, they'd be a lot better. I'm willing to bet that if the Timberwolves had Karl Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell the entire time, I don't think they'd be last place. I don't know if they'd be a playoff team. Believe. If the Grizzlies had Jaren Jackson Jr. the entire season, I'm willing to bet that they'd be better. If the Blazers didn't miss CJ and Nurk for 2 to 3 months, I bet they'd be better. And obviously, if the Lakers had LeBron and Anthony Davis, they are not a 6 seed. I think everyone can agree that the Lakers are not a 6 seed if they are totally healthy. So it's crazy how much injuries create the narrative throughout the rest of the season, because a lot of people are forgetting how good the Lakers and the Warriors are right now.
So I'm going to ask the question about the elephant in the room. Does this season's shorter offseason, more games and less days, have to do with the amount of injuries that are going on right now? Do players playing more games and less days impact this? Does the shorter off season impact this, or is this just another year filled with injuries?
Man, you'd have to think. You'd have to think there's something with it. I mean, it was a quick turnaround, a very quick turnaround, especially for even the Lakers and the Heat that went to the finals, that were in the bubble for so long. That it's a quick turnaround. So I think so. I mean, those sports medicine staffs are top notch. So I don't doubt that they put their athletes in. They've got the athletes in the best situation they could. But you got to think with a quick turnaround that it's something. But they've always been trying to play catch up. And so I think now they can finally get caught up, as it were, from the shortened season last year to maybe have a more normal off season this upcoming. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that it has something to do with it. I think also freak injuries is just a thing that sports has. I think that it kind of does. All these guys are in the best shape that humans really can be in, and playing more back-to-backs definitely is a factor, and playing more games in less days is definitely a factor. But I still am of the belief that it doesn't matter as much as people might give it credit for, going into the rest of the season, because injuries happen. They happen every year to star players all the time, and it's just one of those things that is going to happen forever. Injuries is never not going to be a part of the game. Maybe there's more this year. I'd love to dive into the stats after the season, see how much it is compared to another one. But I think that generally it's just one of those things that happens.
That makes sense. I mean, I think both sides are to be heard here. More games, less days, less prep time, less off season. No wonder there's going to be more injuries. But also, people get hurt every year. ACLs are torn. Stuff like this happens. It's part of playing a violent sport sometimes. I mean, when you drive to the hole, you Euro step through people. When you take a hard step and cut, you're putting stress on your knees, and that happens, and that leads to torn ACLs. It's just stuff like that. Is just part of the game. On that note, let's kind of take a step back here. Let's talk about the rest of this whiskey, because we kind of got to get into the taste of that before we break into the Eastern Conference.
Whenever I have a bad back, you know what helps me? A little bit of bourbon. I love me some bourbon. I think it's pretty good stuff. Personally, I can really taste they talk about the charred barrels a lot in the description, and that's kind of what sets the Elijah Craig brand apart. Is that Elijah Craig, the guy back in the day, he was the first one to start putting the whiskey inside of charred barrels instead of perfectly good barrels. And in those charred barrels, you can get a lot more of the smoky taste, and I get a lot of that with this.
Yeah, smoky. I was gonna call it oaky, if that's even a thing, if that's even the right word, if that's a word. Very oaky. Yeah, it's got good flavor. Definitely something I could see myself at the Kentucky Derby, just sipping on. None of the mint julep crap, just have a little bit of Elijah Craig.
Yeah, I was going to say it tastes like a burnt tree, but like an old tree, like a tree that's got some character to it. You know what I'm saying?
Tree with a lot of rings. Tree with a lot of rings on the trunk.
Mitch almost spit out his whiskey when I said this.
Just like, what a resounding review. You know what your whiskey tastes like? Like a burnt tree. It's like, also known as smoky flavor is what burnt trees are.
He called it smoky. I called it oaky, which a smoky
I'm just
oaky
bringing
tree
it
that
in the terms of the people.
The people terms. Yeah.
And this is a burnt tree of a whiskey, which is a good thing, ladies and gentlemen. It's got some character to it.
I still get a little like fruit. I get a little bit of orange out of it. There's some still like sugary parts of it. I think that when you swallow it, you get a lot of like the spiciness to it, because they definitely add a little spice to it. But when I first drink it, it kind of like is, you get the smoky flavor, and then when you swallow it, you get like a lot of that spiciness that they're going for. I think that this is actually a pretty good one. I like it a lot as someone that likes a little bit of the harsher whiskeys, but if you're if you're just getting into whiskey drinking, I would not jump into Elijah Craig.
It's definitely harsher. It's definitely, you do get the hints of, I want to say almost cherry is the fruit that I'm getting. I guess I can get a little bit of orange, but I get mostly cherry. You definitely get a decent amount of spice to it, but you also get a decent amount of smoothness, a little bit of sugar. You do get a little bit of sweetness. There's a lot of flavor profiling going on. I would agree it's definitely one of the more complex and a little bit harsher of whiskeys to the ones we've had on the podcast. But in my opinion, you get an overwhelming amount of just in-your-face smoke, which is honestly something I like. It's smoky, but then it also the back half is smooth. So you get a lot of smoke, a lot of smooth. Then on the second sip, that's when you can kind of just dissect the flavors a little bit more.
Yeah, I totally agree. Look at you learning to like all the smoky flavors. Very proud of you, E.
The burnt tree, the old burnt tree. It might be a cherry tree. He said he had cherry, citrusy.
It might be
a
cherry
tree. But yeah, Kentucky obviously known for its bourbon and its whiskey, and it's
and this is one of the OGs.
It's one of the OGs. Yeah, it's like there's some good people up there in Kentucky and West Virginia, like my ancestors. I don't think they were moonshiners. They probably, maybe they were. I don't know. But
they're all moonshiners.
They're all the Hatfields probably were moonshiners, along with their log industry, their logging company.
Yeah, thank you to the people of Kentucky. You're doing God's work. Thank you very much for your.
I gotta make it to a Kentucky Derby out there. It looks like a hell of a time.
Hell yeah!
It looks like a hoot.
A hoot and a half.
A hoot and a half. I'm here for that. But yes, that's kind of breaking down the Elijah Craig a little bit more in terms of flavor. Let's bust into this Eastern Conference, shall we? Unlike the Western Conference, where the top teams have been relatively injury free, the Eastern Conference, almost most of the injuries have been towards the top. Top team in the East, 76ers. Embiid has missed 18 games. That's a lot of games for your MVP, your best player.
Yeah, this is the prime example of how injuries dictate the narrative of who wins MVP. You could be the most valuable player to your team. You could be the best player over the course of that year, but if you don't play a certain amount of games and a certain guy in a certain guy's head, it's like, oh, he missed 20 games. He doesn't deserve MVP if he missed 20 games. He hasn't earned it. He got to coast for a little bit. He got to be hurt. He got to rest for a little bit. That's not what an MVP is. So for a lot of people, Embiid, for me at least, Embiid was the MVP frontrunner, and he was gonna win MVP. Number one seed in the East, best player on that team, absolutely balling out, showing everything in his cookbook he was showing out this year. And I loved watching Joel Embiid, but because of these injuries, I really don't think he has a chance at winning MVP anymore. And so it's funny how that narrative is structured just by an injury.
Yeah, that's really rough, and that's a lot of sports too. But I just think it's a strange thing because you can just turn that to where like, oh, I don't know what the Sixers, their record's been since he's been out, but I can't imagine it's great. That it's like, wouldn't he be more valuable because he's out and they're not winning? So like that's always been a strange thing with injuries. Like, but I always thought that was a strange thing that they do. If you're hurt, that somehow hurts you, even though in some ways it makes you more valuable because your team's not winning when you're out there.
Yeah, and we can get into that maybe on another podcast because the verbiage most valuable is not the best. Like the most valuable is the most valuable, not necessarily the best player. You know what I'm saying? And so like a team that like takes a guy away and then they go from like championship aspiring to like not, that means you're very valuable, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily the best player in the league. And so it's another thing that we can get into later where like generally the most valuable player goes to the best player in the league, even though he might not be the most valuable. But let's move on here to the next team because we don't want to be here all day. The Nets have had their merry-go-round of players being out. If you're named, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, or James Harden, you basically can sit out whenever you want, apparently, which is interesting. And it's just a lot of injuries going around.
Or they just bring in the next star to just replace him. It's like, oh, just bring in Blake.
All right, I guess it's Blake's turn to go off. Hey, LaMarcus, you want to score 30 tonight?
Yeah,
all right,
just bring
fine,
in LaMarcus.
it's your turn.
Who's next? Who's going to be next?
I think that the Brooklyn Nets is going to be a very, very interesting test and dynamic going into the playoffs because we kind of saw a little bit of it with the Clippers last year where you did a lot of load management. You didn't get to see everyone play together a whole lot over the course of the season. Do you know how many games all three of their superstars, I mean, discounting LaMarcus and Blake and those guys, but Harden, Durant, and Kyrie, how many games they've actually played together so far this year?
I believe it's 7.
7 is the correct answer, Ethan. They've played 7 games together. That is not a lot. That does not provide a lot of...
That's less than 10.
That less than 10, more than 5.
Is that gonna change? Like as we get closer to the playoffs, which is really, let's be real, is more than the Nets' time. They're geared for the playoffs. That are we gonna start to see the 3, or is it gonna continue to be the management thing until all of a sudden, oh, bam, it's the playoffs. They should probably all be together.
My bet is that we see what they're doing now all the way up until maybe the month or half of the month before the playoffs. And it's like, okay, guys, time to play everyone at the same time and see what we actually look like and see how good they can be. Because I think it's easy for 1 or 2 of those guys to coexist out there because it's just easier when it's a duo of stars. But when you have the trio of stars, it's very interesting to me, the dynamic of who plays what role, who's taking the shots when. Is it a lot of isolation? Is it a lot of James Harden like just playing point guard and pushing out to other guys? I think that the injuries are going to be a huge factor for these guys come playoffs because I think that if there's any reason that they don't win the East, it's because of their lack of chemistry.
Yeah, and I would agree. And we can maybe get into this on another podcast again where what do the Nets do? And again, I agree James Harden is the key because he's going to have to take a major backseat in order for them to succeed. In order for them to win the finals, I think he has to average less than 20 points per game in the playoffs.
See, I think that's interesting because in one sense, I think in scoring he takes a backseat, but I think in actual like usage rate he steps up. Yeah, I think that he's going to be averaging 15 assists. I think that he's going to be the assist guy, and I think that he's going to be totally cool with that.
Yeah, I agree. It's where his shooting is going to have to take a backseat to his playmaking, which is going to be very interesting to see where they end up. But yes, that revolving door. We didn't even talk about Dinwiddie, who tore his ACL at the beginning of the year, who's a very vital part of this team, but they've kind of moved on from him. It's almost like they've built as if he's not there, which is going to make an awkward thing this offseason. Are you a part of our team? Or are we just trying to get rid of you? We don't know. Let's move on down the list here. The Bucks, relatively healthy. Not a lot of injuries coming out of Milwaukee right now, which is good for the Bucks, bad if you're the if you're the other teams in the East. But moving forward here, going to the next team, which is the Atlanta Hawks, they've had a lot of players on and off of injury, but again, no one out long enough to be kind of note.
Yeah, the Hawks are more in the nagging injury category, where Trae Young currently has missed a couple of games. They're saying he may or may not play tonight. Clint Capella has missed several games. I know Cam Reddish has missed several games. They just have a lot of those nagging injuries. I'm going to miss 2 to 3 to 4 games. And they've had a lot of that over the course of their year. That being said, still the number 4 team in the East and still playing very well.
That's wild. I checked the standings the other day, and I usually just look at the West with the Clippers, and I for whatever reason I peeked at the East, and because you have to just scroll down more on ESPN for me, and it's like, wait, Atlanta Hawks are 4? It's like you don't hear much about them, but they're there, they're hanging around.
Well, keep in mind, 4th in the East is a game below 500, maybe 500, maybe a game above 500. You're barely scratching the playoffs if you're at that point in the West. So
still the 4th best team in your conference.
Another thing we'll get to another day. Or we're just basically making a list of things we'll get to later.
You've had some great teases today for future podcasts.
We're going to get
you had
there,
some
ladies and gentlemen.
Great teases. Well done.
Moving on to the Heat, they have been very...
Hang on. The Atlanta Hawks are 30-25. They are 5 games above 500, not a game below that you just said a couple seconds ago.
I'm sorry, Atlanta.
So apologize to all the Hawks fans out there.
I'm sorry, Atlanta.
They're just dying for their team to get back.
To where?
To being like they were, 25, 30 years ago?
Hey, conference finals.
Couple generations
Conference
ago?
finals less than 10 years ago. They were conference
With
with that Kyle
Horford,
Korver, Paul Millsap, Jeff Teague,
Hawks?
Horford, and DeMarre Carroll Hawks. Hey, that team was a conference finalist.
Do they have a name? Do they have a nickname? Like you have the Grit and Grind Grizzlies?
No, they
have
had
a
the
nickname.
Atlanta Hawks.
They're
just
called
the Atlanta Hawks.
And they had
Original.
4 All-Stars, except DeMarre Carroll didn't make it, and he was very upset about that fact, if I remember correctly.
So
Yeah,
5 games
it's fair.
above for the 4 seed.
So yes, the Hawks playing well, mainly just nagging injuries. Let's move on to the next team, which is the Miami Heat, who started off real rough this year, and I think that a part of that was due to the having a short offseason off of that major run, making it to the finals, and another big part of that was not having one Jimmy Butler out there on the court. He fought a lot of COVID stuff early on.
Yeah, he was in and out of the lineup for a while, and he played kind of at the start of the season, but not enough for him to get any sort of rhythm or any sort of kind of just flow of the game. And so basketball is such a rhythm sport, and it's very important to kind of get with the flow and everything. So not having that from your best player is tough.
Yeah, exactly. And Jimmy especially is a rhythm guy. Whenever I see him, he's always he kind of doesn't even take shots until near the end of the game when he's really gotten into the flow of the game and everything. But the Heat clearly struggled early on without Jimmy, and then Jimmy came back and he was kind of a shell of himself because he was still uber skinny, still getting back from the disease. And now you see the Heat launching up the Eastern Conference standings because of how well they've been playing over the last several months. Now let's move on to the next team, which is the Boston Celtics. Relatively healthy, but they have had long stints without Kemba Walker.
Similar to Jimmy, but also not similar to where Kemba didn't have COVID. He was hurt, but he was also missed the majority of the beginning of the season, which led to them having to play without him for a while, which it's difficult when you have a good player out at the beginning of the year because you kind of get used, you're forced to play without him, and then you get used to playing without him, and then you get him back, and then it kind of just changes the whole way you have to play the game, which makes it hard and just very disjointed in way you have to kind of go about playing basketball.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I've seen a few Celtics games this year, and it's interesting because they've almost built this style of basketball without Kemba, and it's yeah, you should come back and you'll make them that much better. And it's weird that they've built a style without one of their best players.
Yeah, and when you saw that at the beginning of the season, that's when Jaylen Brown was really popping. I mean, there was a time there where almost all the way up to the All-Star game, people were discussing who is better, Tatum or Brown, because Brown was playing so well without Kemba Walker being on the court, because Brown obviously got to take a lot more shots, got a lot more opportunity on the offensive end of the court, and he was really showing out. Kemba comes back, and now you got 3 guys that think that they're superstars, that all think they should be taking shots, and the Celtics to this day still don't really feel like they've found their identity. Who are they? Who is your guy? Who are the people that you really rely on? What is everyone's spots on the court, and where are you going to? The Celtics just seem lost ever since Kemba even came back, and that's another funny thing that injuries can do. Like you're saying, when you're missing a star player at the beginning of the year, it throws off the entire flow of your team dynamic of who is what player. Roles are very important in basketball.
Yeah, I mean, every team has a hierarchy. I mean, it's very important. Teams might not say they have a hierarchy, but every team has a hierarchy. And even if it's a tiered hierarchy where 2 guys can be on the same level, but there are definite levels in terms of importance to a team. And you take a guy off of that and you get used to playing on different levels, and then you reintroduce that guy, it throws all sorts of chemistry things into a mix that just becomes murky and difficult to deal with.
And I don't think that's a great sign if you're the Celtics, that I guess you're not where you want to be just yet. But without Kemba, he's under contract for, it looks like, this year, and then 2 more years at pushing up towards $40 million for a guy that you kind of sort of developed a style to play basketball without him. And he's heavily under contract. So do you start to think, do they find an option in some sort of trade? Is Kemba really an answer for the Celtics?
Yeah, I think that these are all questions that the Celtics are really going to have to figure out come this offseason, because they're stuck right now for the rest of the season. This just is your team, but I think they're going to be very disappointed with the end results. Now let's move on to the next team, which is the Hornets.
They're out one of the best young players in the NBA. Mitch will disagree per usual, but LaMelo Ball fracturing his wrist, breaking his wrist, whatever you want to do, did something to his wrist and is just out for the year. You're missing your most, maybe not your best player, but your definite most explosive and electric player, and definitely the guy that you were building your team around to be your guy.
I don't know if they're building their team around him right now. I mean, look, they got Terry. They got a bunch of oldies on their team. They got Gordon Hayward and Terry Rozier.
Exactly. So you're building your team around the young guy.
Here's what I know: is LaMelo went down.
See my face.
Chino Hills represent, Mitch. Chino Hills represent.
For those of you who don't know, Brandon is from Chino Hills, which is where the Ball family played high school.
Yeah, my friends played pickup with them, and they all throw lobs to each other. It really wasn't fun. I never saw it myself. I just heard. It's like some folklore, but.
Death, taxes, and Mitch hating LaMelo Ball.
Yeah, that's just disrespectful.
Come on.
You're going to bring up Scary Terry to build your team
You're
around.
right.
When
The
you have
Hornets
a young
are
player.
building to win a championship right now. That's what they're doing.
30-year-olds.
No, but clearly they're trying to build a team that's a win now team. And even after LaMelo went down, they didn't necessarily get worse. They actually moved all the way up to the 4 seed, and now they're hanging right around that 4 to 6 seed without LaMelo Ball. He's not vital to what they are doing and what they really want right now, which is to be a relevant playoff team is what the Hornets are trying to get to. LaMelo is their future. I'm not denying that LaMelo is their future. I'm not denying that.
That's what you just did.
No, but they have not built this team to be around LaMelo Ball. If they were doing that, they would have never signed Gordon Hayward. They would have traded Terry Rozier for other picks. They would have gotten more young guys to put around LaMelo and just given him the keys to the car, which they really haven't done this year.
Is it so bad to introduce a good player to winning basketball? Is it so bad to nowadays in the NBA, you have to draft a guy, trade anyone that can ever dribble a basketball away and hand him the ball and say, all right, we're going to win 3 games this year, but you're going to score 50 points a game. I think that they are still building around LaMelo Ball, just in a way that's more constructive than the blatant tanking Sixers ever did.
I find it hard to believe you're building a team around older veterans when you've never really been where you want to be.
Well, no, but it's not that they're building around the veterans. It's that they are bringing veterans in, and they're not using LaMelo as their star key asset right now. Right now, the team revolves around what Scary Terry and what Gordon Hayward do, and then everything LaMelo did was also just bonus. really the team runs by the older vets right now. And maybe you're hoping to bring these like good solid guys, vets in to like help bring LaMelo mature a little bit, help him grow into a leader, help him like slowly ease him into the NBA as opposed to just giving him the keys to the car and like letting him run with it. Maybe that's what they're doing, but I'm just saying right now the best players in this team is not LaMelo Ball.
I mean, it's a good situation to be in if you're LaMelo, that you're not just thrown to the wolves to lose every game, even to just develop. Like, he can actually develop around like a decent team, but I still find it hard to believe you're building a team around older Gordon Hayward, aging. I'll call him aging. I'm not going to call him old. Aging. Well, I guess we're all aging. Old Gordon Hayward. Sorry.
We started off talking about injuries, and I turned it into a LaMelo Ball debate.
Per usual,
I'm done.
every
I'm
podcast,
done.
man.
Look, this
Regardless,
is just my opinion.
respect the
LaMelo's
wonderful
hurt.
people in
Mitch
Chino
hates
Hills,
him.
Mitch.
We
Wonderful
all
people.
understand. Mitch, you get it. We all get it. You hate the guy. He's done nothing to you personally, but you hate the guy. Moving on. The Knicks are without Mitchell Robinson. He's hurt. He broke his foot. Kind of a big deal. Not really. The Knicks are still good. Bulls, relatively healthy. Haven't really lost anyone. Markkanen's on the fritz, per usual. Rifling these off because we're low on time. Raptors, Lowry and Fred VanVleet have been in and out of the lineup, but overall been relatively healthy. Siakam also missed some time. Another team hit by COVID.
Yeah, of all those, the things that really point out to me, the Knicks losing Mitchell Robinson, they've kind of fallen down the standings ever since Mitchell really went down. They were the 4 seed. Now they're going all the way down to the 7-8 seed. And then the Raptors not having Lowry, I think that just kind of killed them as far as wanting to make that surge back into the playoff picture. Those to me are the two things that really are pointed out. And also the Wizards really missed a bunch of games early on due to COVID, which is another kind of injury thing that needs to be talked about this year specifically.
Yeah, COVID definitely hit the Wizards hard. I hadn't gotten to them yet, but Wizards definitely got hit by COVID. The Cavaliers, we're now at teams out of the playoff hunt in the West. We are now teams outside of the top 10. So Wizards at 11 definitely got hit by COVID really hard. Cavaliers have been without Kevin Love for a while. But he doesn't really play for them.
I kind of forgot he was still on the Cavs.
Yeah, he's still there. I think he's there collecting a paycheck and just hanging out in Cleveland, which I don't know what you do in Cleveland, but you do you, Kevin
Rolling
Love.
in them checks.
Magic have arguably been the most injury hit team so far this year with Fultz, Cole Anthony, Jonathan Isaac, among others who have been out of the lineup. Mo Bamba has been out of the lineup as well. Just a team that's been brutalized by injuries. And lastly, the Pistons are just too bad to mention anything.
Yeah, no, you're kind of right there. It's funny how hard the Magic have been hit, losing Fultz, Anthony, and Isaac. Now they're just kind of running with R.J. Hampton as their point guard, and I think they're just gonna throw a bunch of darts at the wall and see what sticks between Fultz, Anthony, and R.J. as their starting point guard going forward. All those teams definitely hit. It'd be interesting to see if they were all healthy, if any of them make runs at the playoffs. My guess is the Raptors would be a little bit better with Lowry, and they'd be more in the playoff hunt. But overall, it's not super surprising to see these teams where they are.
Yeah, a little bit less in the East, slightly. I mentioned the 13 of the bottom 13 Western Conference teams all had a top player out. Eastern Conference, a little more normal, as it were, of just there wasn't that big chunk of teams consecutively of their best players, but it's really hit both conferences of the league.
Yep. Injuries have definitely played a part this season. We kind of hit on it earlier. Whether or not it's just a normal year where injuries are a thing, or if it's more, shorter season, more games and less days related. I feel like we have this conversation every year. We're like, wow, there's a lot of injuries this year. And then every year we kind of just revisit it this year. But this particular year, it seems more stars have been hit with injuries. So that is interesting to say. But those are all the teams in the NBA that have struggled through some injuries. Per usual, we'll be back next week with another podcast. But yeah, guys, this is another podcast down, and hopefully next week we'll be on a higher note.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about some fun stuff hopefully next week. But Brandon, thank you for joining us tonight.
Of course, anytime.
Hey, you know what, guys? Cheers to health.
Cheers.
To health and to Elijah Craig.